Hello, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine, Content Specialist for the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship, which is part of the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Welcome to our Middle School Civics Highlight Series. Today we focus on benchmark 1.10, in which we will compare the viewpoints of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists regarding ratification of the U.S. Constitution and including a Bill of Rights. In Part 1, we compare the viewpoints of the Federalists and Anti-Federalists regarding ratification of the Constitution. We'll be focusing on identifying the viewpoints of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, focusing on both the ratification of the U.S. Constitution as well as the reasons for including a Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution. We will also focus on looking at the Federalist position on opposing a Bill of Rights. So we're going to be starting with a Federalist paper that was written by John Jay. There were 85 Federalist papers, and these 85 Federalist papers were published in New York newspapers to convince the people of the state of New York, to convince their state legislature to adopt the new Constitution. Now, the state of New York wasn't the only vote, but at the same time, New York was such a large, prosperous state that it could have an influence on the other states as to whether or not they would go along with this proposed plan. So there were 85 Federalist papers, all published in New York newspapers, but they provide a wonderful set of essays for us to look at how different viewpoints are argued on various sides of issues. So let's focus on what John Jay had to say. Nothing is more certain than the indispensable necessity of government. And it is equally undeniable that whenever and however it is instituted, the people must cede to it some of their natural rights in order to vest it with requisite powers. So what is he saying? He's saying, first of all, government is necessary. And there's another Federalist paper that's very famous, Federalist 51, where the author of that Federalist paper, Alexander Hamilton, says, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." Meaning, if everyone had a pure soul and didn't consider denying other people their freedom, their life, their liberty, etc., so that they could take something for themselves, then no government would be necessary. But when you have people running the government and not angels, then that means you have to have a government that has restrictions and rules, etc. So a government is necessary. But to do that, the people must cede to it, meaning give back. Cede means to return or give back some of their natural rights in order to vest it with requisite powers. Now, there are three natural rights that are the emphasis of the Declaration of Independence that the U.S. Constitution seeks to protect as it is structured. One is life, then liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And these are very broad ideas. So what the author is saying is that people must be willing to give up some of their freedom. They must be willing to give up some of their desires in terms of what they pursue that make them happy, to vest it with requisite powers. So government has to have power, and the only way to do that is if you and I give up some of our freedom. So for example, we need to pay taxes. That's giving up some of our freedom, because if I have $1 and I have to pay 5 cents of that dollar in taxes, that means that I only have the freedom to decide how to spend 95 cents instead of $1. He then goes on. It is well worthy of consideration, therefore, whether it would conduce more to the interest of the people of America that they should, to all general purposes, be one nation under one federal government. So he's saying, is it more conducive? Is it better and in the interest of the people of this country that they should have a government that's strong for the entire country? The interest of the people of America, to all general purposes, be one nation under one federal government. So if we are calling ourselves America and we are the people of America, then there should be one national government of America. Or that they should divide themselves into separate confederacies, right? So the 13 states under the Articles of Confederation were very much functioning like 13 countries. And that, in many respects, is why the Constitution was suggested, why a federal government was suggested. Because without it, then if there were conflicts between two states, especially bordering states, then they might decide not to speak to each other. And is that going to promote the security of those states, or is it going to somehow limit the security and opportunities of those states? So it was really important to John Jay to emphasize the idea that there should be a national government to ensure that the 13 states that were in existence at the time would be in their best position to succeed as individual states within a larger nation versus individual acting like individual countries. Let's continue. Or that they should divide themselves into separate confederacies and give to the head of each state, the same kind of powers which they are advised to place in one national government. So do we want the different state governments to have the same powers that would be held at the national level by the national government? So he's questioning the wisdom of that. Now let's look at an excerpt from an essay focusing on opposing the proposed Constitution. It is a complete system of government and armed with every power that a people in any circumstances ought to bestow. It is a path newly struck out, and a new set of ideas are introduced that have neither occurred or been digested, but it ought to undergo a candid and strict examination. So what he's saying is that if we're going to be thinking about this new government, right, is a path newly struck out and a new set of ideas that have never occurred. So a federal government had not existed up to this point. So how do we know that it's going to work? We should really examine these ideas. It ought to undergo a candid and strict examination. We ought to truly examine these ideas so that we can get a really good sense about how this new invention, this federal government, is going to function. It is the duty of everyone in the Commonwealth to communicate his sentiments to his neighbor, divested of passion and equally so of prejudice. So it's everybody's responsibility to become informed about what this new Constitution and federal government that goes with it will look like, and to discuss it and debate it, because it is much easier to dispense powers than recall them. It is much easier to give out powers than to take them back. So before we give this new idea of a federal government with a strong national government, before we make a structure of government function in that way and give power to the national government, let's make sure that we know what we're doing, because it's much easier to give power than to take it back. On this last slide, we're going to be looking at an excerpt from Federalist 84 that was written by Alexander Hamilton. In Federalist 84, Alexander Hamilton is focusing on why it is not necessary for the United States Constitution to include a Bill of Rights. The most considerable of the remaining objections is that the plan of the convention contains no Bill of Rights. And yet, the opposers of the new system who profess an unlimited admiration for its Constitution are among the most intemperate partisans of a Bill of Rights. To justify why they want a Bill of Rights, the intemperate partisans, to justify their zeal, their commitment to a Bill of Rights, they allege or they argue two things. One, though the Constitution of New York has no Bill of Rights in it, it contains in the body various provisions in favor of particular privileges and rights. So what he's saying is he's kind of suggesting that New York is being a little bit unclear, because after all, the New York Constitution has no Bill of Rights either, right? That Hamilton is saying the national Constitution won't have a Bill of Rights. And he's saying, well, the New York Constitution doesn't have a Bill of Rights. And yet, there are various provisions that favor privileges and rights in the government itself, in the Constitution itself. So if New York can live without a separate list of rights, why can't the nation live without a separate list of rights? And we're also modeling ourselves, the writers of this Constitution who support the Constitution without a Bill of Rights. We also modeled ourselves after Great Britain, by which many other rights not expressed are equally secured. So here we are, we're following Great Britain in not having a listed Bill of Rights, and we're following New York. And yet New York is our biggest objector to this proposed system. And so Alexander Hamilton is using this evidence to make his argument about why the proposed Constitution does not require a separate list of rights. Thank you for joining me for Middle School Civics Highlights. Do you still have questions? Please contact us using the information that appears on the screen. Till next time, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine. Thank you for joining me.